Well, thank you very much for having me today again on the show. Let me begin by addressing the premise of your question. Lashkar is not at the risk of falling. Last night, which is approximately now 20 hours ago, scores of additional special forces were flown into the district center in Lashkar who have been effective at pushing back the Taliban. Because the Afghan special forces, given the experience that they've gained over the last 20 years, have been effective without fail at every single battle against the Taliban, who are simply unable to stand when the special forces arrive. And so Lashkar is not only not going to fall, but it is actually being liberated as we speak. And those media outlets that you said that the Taliban have actually closed are going to be able to come back and to report on the atrocities that the Taliban actually committed in Lashkar, which remains important because Lashkar and the neighboring province of Kandahar are actually the spiritual sort of center of the Taliban. That is where they spawned, and that's where they come from, and that's why they're focusing so much on Lashkar and Kandahar, but they've been failing to take over those two provinces. Taliban have a strategy of one thing, and that is a strategy of takeover by terrorism, which means wherever they go, they silence critical voices, which is why they've actually closed down the media outlets in Lashkar, and they only monopolize violence, which means they're the ones that take people out of their houses and execute them summarily. You heard about the case of the famous comedian in the neighboring province of Kandahar. They are the ones that then pump out their own poisonous rhetoric and their own poisonous propaganda. And so for them, it's really less about narrative and more about mainstreaming violence, because the Taliban used to pretend that they actually support peace, but violence and their terrorism was really only to make themselves be taken seriously. But I think that that peace part has been forgotten. The Taliban are now only doing violence for violence's sake. This is no longer a politically motivated set of violence. This is the Taliban commanders on the ground actually pursuing their own violent agenda, which is divorced from what their negotiating team in Qatar is saying, which is that the movement is interested in making peace. This is really important. In years past, the Taliban were only able to create trouble, security problems in about 14, maybe 15 provinces of the overall 34 provinces in the country. This year, unfortunately, they've been able to escalate that to nearly all of the 34 provinces of the country. Now, if you have 14 fighters, you send them to 14 provinces. But how do you send 14 fighters to 34? You don't, because you have additional fighters who have additional guns, who have additional explosives, and so they are receiving sustenance and support from across our southern frontier with Pakistan. But the net result of this escalation of violence, geographic expansion of the violence, is that, according to the UN figures, 47% increase in civilian casualties, 2/3 of them, unfortunately, women and children. And it's not just because the Taliban have pushed violence, it is because they've actually pushed violence into people's homes. Talib fighters are actually taking cover in people's homes. Talib fighters are also moving on the streets in large numbers, forcing children to walk with them, so Afghan forces have trouble and difficulty shooting at them for fear of harming these children. And so there's a lot of violations of the laws of war that is happening, and that's primarily why the violence is increasing and the humanitarian situation remains so dire.